everyone. This is Barlaan, Director of Women's Federation for World Peace International Office for UN Relations. We are here today for our UN Roundtable Talk. Women's Federation's representatives usually every week, every month, or whenever there are big UN conferences, we debrief ourselves and we talk about what has transpired at the UN, important conversations. So, yeah, that's what we are doing right now. And we have with us our special guest. Well, actually, he is now a part of our team. We welcome him. He is our new senior advisor for Women's Federation's UN Relations. We have with us Ambassador Mario De Leon Jr. I'd like to formally introduce him. He is a champion of Filipino diplomacy with over 30 years of trailblazing service. Ambassador De Leon led key missions in New York and South Africa, fiercely advocating for Filipino veterans and uniting global communities. A proud Ateneo graduate and award-winning public servant, his legacy is one of honor, leadership, and unwavering service to the nation. Ambassador Mario De Leon, and here, hi, Amba, and here we have our UN representative and journalist, Dr. Marver Montibon. We are going to talk about big things that happened at the UN the last few days. And Ambassador, we went to attend the Financing for Development Forum. So it's a preparation for the Sevilla conference for financing and development. So Ambassador, if you could tell everyone about the Financing for Development conference.
Well, first of all, thank you for that very kind introduction. You know, it's been some time since I've been exposed to multilateral diplomacy. I started my career in the Foreign Service. One of my first assignments was being permanent delegate, of course, to the mission of the United Nations. And I handled two sectors. The first sector related to social, cultural, humanitarian, which I presume gave me some institutional memory in working better with, of course, the Women's Federation for World Peace Inc., right? And secondly, it's more of international security. Well, of course, that was very important at the time. But anyway, talking about financing for development, I think, forums, this has been going on for some time. You know, I always look back at history whenever I look at a forum, right? It started in Monterrey. That was in 2002. If you know 2002, that was after the 2001 happening here in New York.
The 911.
Right?
Yes.
And the next one was in Doha. I think it was in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And that was during the height of the financial...
The collapse. Recession. Yes.
And the third is, of course, Addis Ababa, 2015. It's 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in 2015? I'm not so sure if I could relate it to a global development the same way that it happened in the past. But definitely at that time, I think there was still a lot of globalization going on, and of course, everyone was looking at liberal democracy more as the default, I would say, philosophy of the whole world. Now, right now, 2025, we're treading definitely into new challenges. Okay, so going to the forum, which was mentioned by Merle. My first takeaway there is I started understanding more on how the UN system provides, a platform for discussing how finance for development can be achieved, right? Now, one of the things I understood is, of course, public finance for development has always been there. It's usually to what we call ODA, right?
Mhm.
Official Development Assistance. But what they started discussing more extensively there is what we call private finance for development. Yeah. That is something new, and it's something that has not been proven yet to be really successful. That's why they were talking about hybrids, what they call blended finance.
Yes, yes, that was my question. What is blended finance?
So how does that look like, Amba? Blended finance.
Yeah, blended finance is you get funds from the public sector or public finance. For instance, let's look at the IFIs. When you talk about the IFIs, it's the World Bank Group and, of course, the MDBs. I'm talking like somebody already from finance. That is multilateral development banks, right?
Mhm.
Usually they provide grants. Okay. If you have a project in a country, they provide grants usually for technical assistance and for feasibility studies. Okay. So that's where they start the process of development projects. They usually start first with financial feasibility study. Then who will be implementing it, right? So there is usually a recipient. It might be before it was always a government agency, but right now it could be civil society. Civil society could also avail of that, right? If they have expertise, for instance, in the field of health, the field of education, the field of women's role in development, then they can come in, right? Now, this is where private finance comes in because we will try to identify a for-profit company that wants to invest in that kind of development project. Could be a company that is involved maybe in digital technology. Maybe they want to address digital divide in women's community. I mean, now women's issues, or addressing poverty issues, or trying to upgrade the agricultural practices, right? So they come in there because they want to look at certain innovations that are being introduced by civil society and at the same time, which is looked at by the IFIs as promising areas. Now, why is the role of the private sector combined with public finance from the IFIs important? Because that's what they call the risking. If you if you
So
recall,
it's risky.
it's a risky investment. If, for instance, let's talk about Ayala. If Ayala is into women's development in the Philippines, for instance, he wouldn't want to go immediately into a project, not unless there is another group, that undertakes the feasibility study,
Mhm.
and that takes resources, right? You need a lot of resources also for that, so that at least they will have certain confidence to really fund it when it is already proven to be financially feasible or operationally feasible.
So that is the framework of
That is the
blended
framework of
financing.
blended finance, where you
Yes,
combine
yes.
both public finance, private finance. Now, it's more complicated than the way I, of course, discuss it. But this is something new, and it has not been done, I think, in Philippines. I'm not so sure that
Evolving financial architecture from it started in Monterey and then went to Doha. So now Addis Doha and then Addis Ababa. Would you consider that the forum is the stage or planning where the reform of the global financial architecture? Because last year during the Summit of the Future and that document, the Pact for the Future, they one of their 6 pillars is to reform the global financial architecture. Would you say that this is a part of in a road to reforming the global financial architecture?
the answer is yes, because it is where you try to distill, several positions, several ideas on how you could go about reforming, right?
Mhm.
Because if you don't have buy-in from all the stakeholders, the reform won't be successful. And we're talking about multilateral approaches here, right? So it's not a national approach, for instance, right? You have to get all of the developing countries, or what we call the low-income countries, then middle-income countries. These are the classifications now, no? And of course, the donor countries, right?
The Global Financial Institution, IFI. Oh my God, these terms are very new for me. I've learned a lot during these last 2 days. I had to Google it while listening to the speaker. So IFI is the International Financial Institutions, IMF, World Bank. Are they still relevant, really moving forward? You know, there's new organizations like the BRICS. They're forming the BRICS, right? The financial institutions. Moving into the future, these institutions are still relevant.
If you ask me, they are. They definitely are. Because the IMF has been established primarily to provide financial stability, fiscal responsibility. Usually it deals with central banks, right? And in a way, they are the ones who are the lender of last resort. If a country is about to go bankrupt, they're the ones who usually come in and try to, I would say, restore the financial
They
stability.
do have a lot of conditions that
Yeah, I mean that's another issue. But I'm talking about the basic core competence of IMF. It was established as one of the two Bretton Woods, I would say, institutions for development, right? So finance is one. Then the projects, it is the World Bank that undertakes it, right?
Okay, now
So,
I
so,
understand.
so, so there's a difference. So World Bank, right from the start, used to be known as IBRD, right? International Bank for Reconstruction and Development.
Now, I've never heard of that. Maybe I
That's the
wasn't
name
born
of-
yet.
That's the name of World Bank.
Interesting.
You know why I understand this? Because before I entered the Foreign Service, I worked with the World Bank project. It was they called it the Regional Cities Development Project in the Philippines. I was then with the Export Processing Authority, which is right now known as PEZA, Philippine Economic Zone Authority. But at the time, we handled the export processing zones and some industrial estate. But anyway, the purpose of that project was more of regional development, because all of development was centralized in Manila, and they wanted to bring it out to what they called regional cities. And we were talking then about Cagayan de Oro, Davao.
Cebu.
No, for that particular project, Iloilo, Bacolod, those were the four. Cebu had a different one. Okay. So I knew how IBRD really operated. Okay. And they were the ones who really worked well with the UN system. The feasibility study part, they usually deal with UN. So that's what they give to whichever government agency will be uh, actually implementing the project. The project itself, yung one, the ones that will uh, construct the roads, construct ports, you know what I mean, no?
The infrastructure.
Yeah, the infrastructure part, that is where the IBRD comes in. That's why the construction and development. And remember, it was established right after World War II. That's why the construction was part of it.
Because literally you have to reconstruct the rubbles from the war. Right?
Yeah, that's right. In other words, it incorporated some of the features also of the U.S. Marshall Plan, they're aware of that. And even the reparations that was done by Japan to countries that were actually devastated during World War II in the 1880s, right? And we were the recipient of that. I also worked with a group there. It's the Overseas Economic Cooperation Fund. So that's another thing.
So this leads to my question. Where did the ODA start? How was it formulated? Because the official development assistant.
Yeah.
So who uh, who was the proponent, or was it because of the war effort to reconstruct the world?
I have to look at how it became ODA. But I would say that it started. I mean, it became more mainstream right after World War II, primarily because of the Bretton Woods institutions, right? So they call it official development assistance, but it was coming more from international organizations, international financial organizations. But eventually, donor countries like the US get a lot of money for like the Marshall Plans and ODA for the whole of Europe, right?
Yes, and in the last 5 years, the COP conferences, conference on of the parties and the climate agenda, um, they every year, especially last year, the last 2 years, they are mandating the countries to pay the northern the countries to pay the global south. So global north pays the global south, and this is like $1 trillion commitment. And so every country, I don't know how many billion, but like 1 billion every year coming from this country. And I remember 5 years ago, France pledged to Africa 1 billion, and then but they got angry. The southern, the global south, get angry because year after year they do not release this funding. It's like they are not accountable for their commitment. So, um, so I'd like to ask you whether um, is it practical? Is it doable when donor countries promise? Are they accountable?
Well, I'll put it this way. That was a promise at a particular point in time, right? And I remember, okay, let's go back to Addis Ababa, 2050. I just realized now that it was the year when the UN adopted the SDGs, right?
Yeah, 2015. Yes.
Right. So in other words, the 2015 Addis Ababa conference for finance for development was actually coincident with SDGs, right?
Okay. So it's more like they didn't really
It
plan
usually occurs when there are certain global events,
declaration. Yeah, yeah.
events for that matter, right?
Mm.
That are happening.
Yes.
So that would have been very helpful, right? But the way the SDGs unfolded, simply because the donor countries failed to honor at least their pledges, I think about 0.7 of GDP that they should allot for that, so that
0.7 of the country's GDP,
yeah,
they will donate to the fund, the overall global fund for the
SDGs, right?
SDG.
SDG stuff, and it could be. I mean, they will choose which projects they will fund, of course. But what happened is they underperformed, and so it's again lack of funds for many of the SDGs. I mean, in trying to achieve the SDGs and the projects under each SDG.
So I have a question for the both of you since you attended the conference. Hopefully, it will lead to some stabilization and institutionalization of funds. Because in our conferences, Merle, there's always lack of funds as far as women's programs are concerned. It always gets unstable and sustainable because no more funds from government or private sector. So will this conference be looking as a whole, like where are they putting their finances, and what are the fairness structures that promote fairness in terms of interest rates, or is that just like pure donation if it's for the economic part of a country? So, uh, as a whole, will this be substantial and strategic in developing the human dignity
Well,
anywhere?
let me put it this way: the FFD process
Yeah.
is already on its foot here now, right?
Mhm.
And it has evolved. And it has evolved based on global developments. Right now, we're in a stage that, you know, ODA is about half of 20 years ago. That was when
So it's
the
no longer
Monterey,
0.7,
yeah,
it's point 3.5.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I think that's what's happening, right? So that's what they're saying. They're comparing. At the time, maybe that the Monterrey conference happened, 2025. That's 23 years ago, right? So they're talking about 20 years ago. It's about half. So that means there's a deficit when it comes to public finance. And let's remember, the donor countries are the ones also contributing to the IFIs, right? So if the donor countries are cutting on their ODAs and at the same time they are, of course, not giving so much also to the IFIs, then you have public finance really dwindling down. So the approach, I think, of most of the IFIs, because when I attended it the second day, it was the World Bank and the IFI. The continuous refrain that I heard from them is how to really shift from public finance for development to private finance for development. But of course, there was again a debate. Many were calling for blended finance, which we discussed earlier. And again, it's more of, I would say, a discussion of ideas, innovative ideas on how that would be addressed. As to whether that will happen, that's another thing.
But personally, for you, Amba, do you think a blended finance would be more sustainable?
I'm not sure. This is the first, I'm not
remains to
sure.
be seen.
I don't see any proof of concept yet.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, I'm talking about my experience.
Mm.
But if I could just share my personal experience, because I also work with STEMED,
Yeah.
I think you're familiar with that.
Mhm.
We're dealing with, we are a for-profit company that provides a public good, which is educational tools.
Yes.
So the way we were proceeding, we approached, because our pilot project was in the Philippines. So we approached first the Department of Education. The first thing they told us is you should have a proof of concept. And so if you have a proof of concept, we told them that we tried it in some universities already in the US, but they said, no, we want something in the Philippines. That's the reason why we applied for a grant from Korea Cooperation Fund. Fortunately, we were able to get.
So that's a private entity?
No, Korea Cooperation Fund is public.
Is government.
Yeah, it's government.
It's like JICA.
It's
For
no, it's more like USAID when it still existed. No, it's actually like USAID because the Korea Cooperation Fund is the ODA arm of the Foreign Ministry of Korea. Okay.
Okay.
So we were able to get it. So our feasibility study is actually funded by public finance, right?
Yes.
Now, from there, it's given to a company like us. We have not partnered yet with, I would say, a private company in the Philippines who would be interested in pursuing what we're doing. That's what we're trying to look at, right? But we have talks with universities in Mindanao because our two pilot areas are in the Davao region, in the software gen.
So
So,
universities are depends public or private. Some
I'm talking about
universities
private,
private universities.
right? So in other words,
Is it a blended financing or private?
it's
public?
looking like blended if we're able to do it.
Depends on the implementation. I think.
Depends on how successful you are in getting all the stakeholders together. Blended finance is very arduous process.
Yes.
Well, it looks like a double-edged sword in terms of wanting to see a success story. Remember, Amba, we went to this side event, in conference room D, where one of the speakers talked about the public and private partnership. The other side of it is, for example, he mentioned about water system, the water supply in their country. So there's um, the grant. I don't know, maybe from the World Bank and then they partnered with a private company in their country. So, for example, like the counterpart maybe of Manila or Manila Water or something like that. But when it is owned by private company, then it's always profit driven. It's always profit driven. So there's a conflict of interest, and some companies could really just go into profit mode, and they do not care about the welfare of the people. They raise the price of the water. So that wasn't a major issue, because then the funder have less control. And that was like, so this is the other side of private public partnership. We could go the other down south.
Government is funding the private entity to implement
A
the water
grant,
project.
yeah, a grant from the international. Would they call it the MBD, multi stake, multi financial
I would
development bank, MDB? What was that?
NDP.
The water
MDB.
districts, for example, in the Philippines, they are like a conduit of government and public sector and private sector.
Well, water districts are regulatory. Let me put it this way. What happened with Nawasa or MWSS
Mhm.
is they retained their regulatory function, because before they were doing regulation, and at the same time they were distributing.
Mhm.
So in other words, they did both things, right? So what happened is, because of this privatization craze,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
It was the time of globalization.
Yes.
They divided Metro Manila into two, and one went to Manila, and another sector went to Manila. So the distribution is handled by private company, but the regulation remained with government. I think that was the model. Now, of course, if it's handled by, I agree, if it's handled by the private sector, prices will go up, right? They have to have a good ROI, or not, they won't go into this business.
Right. And then it's not just water, energy, that. So in many countries, it's basically the grants.
I am puzzled because, like, why can't, for example, governments or countries look at the model, for example, in the US, when water is really evenly distributed, and this is like purely government, isn't it, Amba? I am not sure, but I don't know if we are like solidly under the state or federal,
In the
or this is also a
PSENG and the
combination
water,
of
it's
private.
private.
I think water here is practically the government.
Right. So it's like really evenly distributed, and funds really there are.
They have a lot of water sources here, and the infrastructure for distributing water is quite uh, not only mature, but very advanced.
Yeah, and
I know that the solar panels in the electricity, your supply, if you buy those panels, and then you get a lot of subsidy.
Well, because government subsidizes it, right?
I
So
think
that
it's
it
more
can be
on
adapted.
the
Right.
political maturity and the capacity of government to really focus on these fundamental, utilities like water.
It's good you
Electricity.
mentioned the US, because
Yeah.
when I look back at all of the innovation solutions that are being discussed in multilateral forum, including the FFT process, right?
Mhm.
And those are already being done by the US.
Yeah, yes, that's
So in other words, it's not exactly new, but this time they're trying to apply it to the big scale. Now, CSOs or civil society organization, they have hard positions on that, right? They always look at ODA as charity.
And then interesting, but this might be like a controversial point, but I want to reiterate
I'm not saying all, but I'm saying
Yeah,
is that's the general position.
yes.
of
So
the
one of
society.
the speakers actually at one of the sessions we attended he was saying that the donor countries should not look at or treat their donors, their donation as charity. And in fact, it is actually a repayment or a reparation of how they destroyed the South, the global South. And
I think
so-
you're familiar with that. It's a debate
so-
here.
so that- yeah,
In the US,
but
right?
pay back for colonizing us.
Yeah, this is a sticky statement, but it really depends on who's talking, right? So, what's your take?
Well, we had an earlier conversation, and it was like a long shot. But if you look at history, that makes sense a little bit. But you have to also consider the here and now of it. That's my take. And in terms of your capacity to enforce that thought, you have to go through a lot of debate on that's your payment for encroaching on our natural resources in my country for so many years. Uh, there's a lot of proving on the part of the country that stated that, you know. But in the here and now in contracts, it has to be very current, very technical in terms of ROI and all that. But then again, I'd like to go back to like, why can't the government subsidize all those fundamentals?
I mean, that is the ideal, but that's the way I do it. But government. One thing I found lacking in all the discussions there
Yeah.
is the issue of tax. Nobody discussed tax. You talk about public finance.
Right.
You're reliant on tax, right?
Tariff? Tariff?
Tariff is a kind of tax, but I'm talking about tax. Okay,
So, tax is local.
The inner, yeah.
I'm talking about tax generation by a country. Right?
Yes, yes.
If you're a donor country, for instance, you should have maybe a very good tax collection system so that
Again, like
you
the
have
US.
so that you'll have revenues enough. So if you talk about a 0.7% of GDP being used for SDGs, then you have a higher base to talk about, right? So you have more funds for ODA.
But you are so important there in the conferences, in the subsequent conferences to infuse like, where is your money? How do you tax your country so that it's sustainable? All this help, all this
Yeah, that's
that you're giving.
that's the issue I saw with many of the CSOs.
Mm.
They never discussed where will the money come from.
Yeah.
Yes. It's always like donation, grant.
Right.
But yeah, the source. Like, how is it created?
And many of them are against definitely private finance for development. It's a good idea. I'm not saying it's working. It's a good idea. It's worth going into that or strengthening maybe the process because it's the only way that you can get out from that conundrum of, public finance dwindling through the years, right? I mean, you cannot rely on something that you don't have, right? We were talking about metrics. You cannot achieve what you cannot measure.
Right. Yes. Yes.
So that's the important thing there. And going back to the SDGs, because I believe this was also actually organized because of the urgency, of achieving the SDGs by 2030. We only have 5 years, right?
So that's why they
2025.
are organizing this financing for development forum. So to boost financial support for the SDGs to achieve the SDGs.
Yeah, from all sources.
5 more years to go.
Yeah, that's why they're
Yes.
talking about innovative approaches, right? If you recall, there were many talks about debt management.
Yes. Debt forgiveness.
Yeah, let's talk first about debts.
I like the forgiveness part.
Yeah, debt forgiveness leads to reconciliation. Right?
Let's talk first about debts. Practically all countries, about 60% of all of the revenues, goes to debt servicing.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't know that.
They discuss it there. 60%.
That's why people are so dependent on the banks.
That's why they
first world
say
countries.
that we cannot talk about all of this without also addressing the debt servicing issue.
Okay, yes. I missed that 60%, but yeah.
So which leads me to the question about on the call, the voice in the wilderness call of Pope John Paul, who was asking first world countries to forgive the debts of the third world countries so that it equalizes the world and we become whole again and we start anew, fresh. because the rates are just so onerous and we could not pay. I mean, Philippines is an example. We're like swimming in our debts by the trillions, and that's same to other countries.
I'm very sympathetic to that. When
Yeah.
I started in the foreign
I do
service,
believe it should happen.
we were one of the most debt-ridden countries in the world. Uh, right after EDSA, we cannot develop simply because we were burdened by the massive debt that was actually secured by the previous administration, or about the Marcos Senior administration. So we were really asking for debt forgiveness, or at least restructure the debt so that we will be in a position to help. But you know what? Everything was dictated by the commercial banks. At that
Were
time,
we forgiven?
no, we were not given any forgiveness. They talk about debt restructuring, meaning they just
Extending
they
it,
just
Schedule of
extended
payment.
it, yeah.
refinancing it for if it's for house
That's one in housing, it's refinancing. It's something you're familiar with when you talk about your budget, paying your credit card
Mhm.
or your loans, right? You
Yeah.
restructure, right? So that's the way they approach it at that time. Remember, I'm talking about the 1980s.
Is there, for example, what happened to Sri Lanka and other countries who were developed, right? Developed by other country, and then they it came to the point where they could not pay anymore. Is there a regulation, a global regulation that you're not allowed to take their port, in exchange of the country not being able to pay back?
Well, if you ask me, they could always file a case.
Mhm.
No, they can always file a case, and there's an arbitration court.
File a bankruptcy, like in America, you can just file a bankruptcy.
Yeah, or contest it before an arbitration court, like in Singapore. But what I'm saying here is, when it comes to, I would say, ODA, like, it's purely between the donor country and the recipient country.
Okay.
Nobody else is involved,
Yeah.
right?
Mm. Yes, so
So
You-
when the terms dictated by the donor countries on it, you either have to accept it or reject it, right?
So IMF or the World Bank cannot intervene.
But then
Not unless they're involved in the process.
there's a layer of that on the politics side, because they just want to accept it, because they would have all this kickbacks and perks also. So there's that layer. That's why we are into that kind of
I
negotiation.
don't really want to go into that because
Vicious cycle.
Yeah,
when I was in South Africa,
yeah.
I handled 10 countries, and
Mhm.
when I had the chance to visit all of the countries under my jurisdiction,
Yeah.
I saw this one major power practically providing funds for the infrastructure development of the southern African countries.
Mhm.
So I don't know what the conditions are,
Yeah.
but definitely I think there might be conditions of that.
Yes. So that's the sad thing.
But would it change now that more people with the transparency, there's internet, other countries can, well, with the UN and there's international bodies could intervene or say, okay, that's too much interest, or this is, you're taking advantage of this country. You
Well,
can't
that
do that.
is if public opinion is able to influence policymakers.
Yes,
But
it's
that's how it's
people.
supposed to
It's
be.
people to understand the complexity of the
Yeah.
financial world, which is quite
Very
difficult.
But
Yeah.
even for me, right? I've now with civil society, the UN civil society for almost 30 years, but these financial terms are very new to me, actually. You need to be in the middle of that conversation and some realities down at the local level to understand, and you have to experience it.
Yeah.
Well, microfinance, like in the local communities, it's, I don't know if it's
Microfinance has been there for a long time. Grameen Bank is the most successful model.
are they still
In
there?
Sri Lanka.
No, they get bank
Yeah.
statement.
But
I
they,
don't know. I followed microfinance for a long time.
they're
Yeah,
quite in trouble, and the
yeah, the
founder,
Brahmin Bank.
the founder is in trouble. So, like, yes,
I've heard that when it was launched, he was like the saint and sage of the
The savior.
microfinance
but
world.
now it's like they're also besieged with so many complaints of corruption.
So that's the problem if you deal with finance. And just like to remind you that I was assistant secretary for financial management at the DFA twice. So I dealt with budgets. I understand the budgeting process of governments.
Mhm.
So it's not as simple as what people think it is. And when you look at the whole budget, you're paying about 50% debt service.
Yeah.
Debt
So
servicing.
you're just left with 50%.
In our law, there's this automatic appropriations bill that every year the country passes the budget. Like, I'm not sure anymore if it's 25 or 70% of the budget goes to foreign debt servicing.
So
And all the
example,
rest will be
the-
chopped to the sectors of education, agriculture, military.
so debt
So-
servicing is the interest rate that we pay, or
Basically.
Well, let me put it this way. The way government makes budget, they make budget based on the needs, okay? So they ask all of the cabinet ministries, okay, submit your budget. Now, the Department of Budget and Management, they know how much is feasible. So when you submit it to them, they cut it. I know that because I prepare it.
yeah,
We usually do it down, up, So in other words, we ask all of our stakeholders, meaning all party partners, so to submit your budget, and we come up with what we call the agency-wide budget that we submitted to EBM, and EBM will look at it, and then they will. Okay, it's automatic 20% cut.
we're saving for for our organization.
Right, because they're the ones who
The
determine.
finance department really has the final say.
And they always have the final say.
Yeah.
So, and they ask you, Congress being the one constitutionally mandated for appropriations, they will be, of course, holding all of these legislative hearings to see if you really deserve that amount. You really have to defend it, right? So that's the budget process of government. Okay. Now, okay, once it is approved, does it mean that we have the funds for that? Not necessarily, because most of the funds will be coming from tax revenues. If the tax revenues cannot meet the expenses as approved by the appropriations, where do you get the balance?
Deficit. No,
I don't know.
where do you
Where-
get the deficit?
You borrow.
Oh, you borrow money.
That's why
Okay,
debt is
debt
addictive.
servicing. Okay. Oh, you borrow, so use credit card. If we were,
No, you borrow. The government borrows.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that
but
they can meet all of the shortfalls.
Yeah.
The deficits, the shortfalls. I know that because I was consul general in London and of course New York. Those are financial centers. And whenever there are shortfalls incurred by the Philippine government, I'm the one who signed, something like the promissory note to the government.
what if a country cannot pay back, Ambassador?
They go to the IMF, which is the
IMF will bail the country out.
with bail, but there are conditionalities.
Yeah.
That's where I think most of the problems are.
Yeah.
Because their number one prescription is austerity.
Explain to us more detail austerity, because I've heard this word, but
Austerity is just living within your means.
right, austerity budget, austerity. So for a country level, okay, austerity. So reduce the budget down to where
What you can only afford.
the base.
But you know what? The whole world is so financially in trouble, right?
And financially interdependent.
Yes.
I
And
would
so
say-
what should this forum discuss on how to address it globally and put it down, look at it also in a micro level? Because again, this is like a problem on climate change. We also have financial problems. So what do you think should be done?
I mean, if we discussed all of this. We discussed debt,
Yeah.
We discussed
Debt
innovative ways
All
of
the debts of the
addressing
third world.
the deficits in public finance.
Mhm.
We're talking about innovative solutions like public finance,
Yeah,
private
private public. So those were
blended
the
finance,
main
then
conversations
debt
today.
swaps, using debt swaps for ODA. We have all of these ideas, right, being discussed. But again, those are all, I would say, just on the table,
Mhm.
and whatever will be adopted by the outcome document. It's another thing.
So is it just a matter of your capacity to negotiate them as a country?
That's how multilateral fora operate.
I have a sticky question. Ambassador, I have a sticky question. A bit sensitive.
I've been dealing with multilateralism.
Yeah, you have to be a good negotiator and you
Samba, I have a bit sensitive question that I asked. So for these grants or private-public partnership, would some percentage go to corruption? The possibility of you being corrupted, it's like a lot of this financing, so debt servicing. But I'm thinking, what about corruption?
how do you
Is it-
curb that, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, is there a possibility that this
That has
funds could
always
be
been in
corrupt?
existence ever since. But before I would say, during my time, when I was dealing with the World Bank, uh, they usually give the loan to a particular government department. Okay. So that's where there are problems. So the way they try to control it is practically they do it on the condition that we will be putting consultants who will be in charge of managing the funds, something like that. So happens that you know most of the most of the loan you get, they go to these highly paid consultants.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
so what happens is the recipient countries, oh, that's onerous. That's where uh, the comment about onerous conditions. I'm saying, like I won't mention countries' names, but most of the big donor countries, they have conditions that will benefit their private sector.
Yes, and I guess so.
Right?
That's
The consultants come from them, right?
Paid very
In,
highly.
in fact, even construction companies should be at least affiliates of their construction companies. That's
And
the
there's
way they
also,
operate.
I mean, it's a double-edged sword because they want trusted companies to handle, to implement it. Because otherwise, if it's not accredited, then there's a tendency that it could go the other way.
Yeah. Now that reminds me. When we were discussing private finance, what really struck me there was Egyptian uh, delegate. He's so steep, I think, in finance. She mentioned let's separate commercial finance. I mean, commercial loans of concessional loans. I think that's very critical because if you are desperate for funds, then you resort to commercial loans.
Yes.
Right? Because you're not eligible for concession. So what I think she was saying is we should have more space for concession loans. Meaning, if you are a low-income country, you should have more access to concession loans where the interest is low. Kasi kung they overburden. So
I think
debt
that's very
management.
viable.
So that's where in concessional loans, that's where the civil society could participate or take part of that big pie of financing for development.
But remember, those are loans. It has to be paid. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is countries when they face budget gaps, usually resort to loans so that they could fulfill at least the budget deficit, right? If they're getting it from commercial sources, the interest is really very high.
So
That's why they go into a debt trap. So debt trap.
Oh, sad. Wow, it's really complicated now. Like our minds are full of this vicious cycle of financing for development, but then uh, it's a cyclone, you know.
Yeah, but I don't know, in your conversation there, did you even talk of cooperatives and how cooperatives generate their own incomes and become self-sufficient? Like these are just resource mobilizations. Like cooperatives have become banks themselves. In the Philippines, in Cebu, where I come from, they became large and they're directly helping farmers. So this is a model, a finance model that is so different, so humane compared to commercial banks that will really eat you up in terms of interest, regardless of your situation. So is that even in the conversation?
I didn't hear that.
Like
but
helping
maybe
co-ops.
But you know what? Talking about co-ops,
Yeah.
there are many banks here that are co-ops actually here in the US.
but it's national. It's not
It's not,
global.
it's not something that is exactly new, right?
No.
They've been doing that. Uh, that's why you have if you're a big organization, for instance,
Like Unified, it has a cooperative.
yeah, it has a cooperative.
Teachers
Yeah. If you're
Yeah.
big, then you can come
You
up
have a
with
bank?
your own
Generate.
cooperative, right?
Unified as a bank? Or
No,
have
it has a big bank account.
a big bank
So
account?
Yeah, but it's a
Special
co-op.
But did they
mention.
turn it into a co-op?
Yeah,
At
yeah,
least,
co-op.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's amazing. Like you generate funds locally. I don't know if the big technical people have thought of that or giving support to that.
Well, hmm,
I'm not sure.
it's
but,
for national,
but-
usually.
Uh-huh.
yeah, I'm not sure, but I think those are solutions at the local level.
Yeah.
If you talk about local level issues, then co-ops are definitely one
The
path,
Grameen Bank was that.
right?
Microfinance.
So, but when you talk about, you know,
Country to country.
country
government.
debts,
Yeah.
I don't exactly know whether
Yeah.
a particular model fits, right?
Yeah.
I did not hear about a clear path to supporting the SDGs, really. I mean, maybe one day was not enough to hear all the conversation. You were there more days. So,
Even the second day.
Nothing.
yeah, I didn't. see a
And
clear path.
let me go now to credit rating. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that will make concessional loans more available is when the credit rating agencies will take into account other parameters, right? Because the way they operate right now, standards and norms are based on the commercial sector. Because that's where they make money, right? The commercial. Now, I remember the Moody's representative there during the side event mentioned that they're looking already at how they can rate blended finance. So it's a good first step. I don't know how they're doing.
I remember from Maldives, ambassador or finance minister from Maldives. Remember on that panel, he mentioned that okay, in terms of credit rating or credit score or rating,
Yeah, credit rating.
It's
like Xperia for us.
right.
Our credit cards.
Yeah.
For them, they said, okay, we are a small country, but we don't have this large GDP, but we invest so much in our natural resources, the green economy. We have so much to offer, and then so more like a carbon footprint, something like that. That give them credit for what they're good at and where they're invested their
So they have
resources,
a good.
what they can contribute to the world. For example, in the green economy. I remember Maldives said something like, okay,
Yeah,
they should
I remember
give credit.
that statement because if you recall, one of the one of the areas I think that was discussed is among the innovative approaches is green and blue bonds, right?
Yes, yes. There's blue and there's green.
It's more for marine,
Ah.
and the green technologies.
Ah. Okay.
Yes.
So they were talking about that. Okay, blue and green bonds. Then they were also talking about debt swaps. Yeah, but that how can you, for example, monetize maybe the interest part into something that would be used for OTA. In other words, when it comes to restructuring, maybe if they can do it that way. But the banks, of course, should agree to that, right? That's the hard part.
Yeah.
But again, those are suggested approaches, right?
I'd like to like inject an idea. Perhaps we should look at countries that are not very rich but are not very poor but are very self-sufficient. For example, how they manage their finances. Palau, for example.
Vietnam or
Palau
Palau is
or the Scandinavian countries.
well,
They're well managed. So we should learn
but
from
they're
them.
rich. They're northern. They're the global north. Palau also they rely on donation of the grants from USA.
Okay.
So they're trusty country. Maybe I'm thinking of Vietnam, Thailand, these countries that rose from
That really
the
developed.
Second World War, right? And or just very recently developed. But I
Vietnam
don't
is
know
amazing.
about their debt.
Maybe, do you agree, Amba, that we should look at their countries? These countries.
Most of ASEAN, except maybe for Cambodia and Laos,
Mm.
are already classified as middle income. Now, there are higher middle income and just middle income.
The Philippines.
No, no, I'm trying to reclassify
Yeah.
the middle income. So right now, the Philippines and Vietnam are almost the same thing. But if you talk about the likes of Malaysia and Thailand, they might be higher compared to us. Because before we used to compete more with Thailand, but right now we're already competing with Vietnam, which is newcomer.
Yeah, Vietnam is the miracle.
Doing well.
Yeah, the last 10 years.
So at least we are already classified as middle income. So we're not low income. We're not what you call a fragile economy. When you talk about fragile economies, you're talking about the likes of countries that
They're at war.
are, that have conflicts,
Yeah.
and they're trying. So again, rehabilitation is part of, if ever that they achieve peace. Peace is just the absence of war, right? That's the definition. Then they will go into that kind. So they want concessions, right? So that they could go back to normal.
But a chronic political conflict in fighting in like the Philippines, isn't it a threat to the economy?
That's a good point. And it's a very good point, I would say. I don't know how it impacts the budget, how it impacts.
Still have zero.
No. What I'm saying is, if they try to tinker with, you don't even have to go far. Right here, if they try to give zero, for instance, to a particular agency,
Yeah.
it's their way of
Yeah.
saying that they're not satisfied with what you're doing.
Last night, so my niece was applying for her college, and then she went into the FAFSA system. It's down. It's down.
So we cannot access
It's suspended.
grant. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really sad.
Well, they did a lot of cuts. I think the approach of the current administration is to go first to austerity. So they're cutting.
Okay.
That's why they're doing a lot of cuts. But one thing they realize, they can only cut so much, because if not, they will have to sacrifice the role of government, right? Somebody has to still be involved in, for example, when it comes to airports, right?
Yes.
Safety, right?
Safety is number one.
Those are important functions of government. I don't think the private sector can go into that.
It's a frontline job.
Wow. There's so much to talk
There's
about.
so much to talk about, because when you deal with government,
Then we just
when you deal with government's involved in so many things, and you can't just look at it just like a big corporation where the chairman says, "Okay, we'll cut this, cut that." Okay, it's not as simple as that.
government is accountable to the public. That's why it's not just like because of profit's sake for profit's
Not
sake.
only that, I mean, the revenues are primarily from taxpayers, and taxpayers are citizens of
Yeah. And must be
the
given
country, right?
service.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well,
So,
that is very educational. This conversation for me is really educational.
I found it also very educational because I've been absent from the multilateral work for some time. This time I saw how it evolved when it comes to discussions. And of course, the more active role of CSOs is something I finally realized. Before it was more of just governments talking, right, among themselves in regional groups.
Mhm.
That that's like ASEAN, you were the ones who were talking. But this time you have civil society groups.
Yes, they
that are
gave us
intervening.
space. They gave us
They're
space.
given a space, they're being listened to. Of course, not as much as we want to, but it's this space.
It's good. It's good with the Economic and Social Council. They gave us two slots per NGO. Normally with CSW we get 20. This time we get two delegates. But then it's more it's okay. You,
Progress.
it's a progress. Yes. So actually, in fact, someone made a comment. I made a comment from in response to the one of the speakers. He said that NGOs make the government accountable, the civil society, and this is always the mantra of every NGO. Like, let's make our government accountable. Then I said, well, in reality, though, governments barely listen to the NGOs, the civil society, because they have like a husband and wife.
They're
On the verge of frenemies, like but then even at the UN, we have very little states to be listened to. So how can NGOs, how can civil society make governments accountable? In reality, in our communities, it's 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 far from reality. Yeah.
But we have to just do what we do.
Okay. Yeah. I
Right.
think from the journalist point of
We
view,
just have to do what we have to do. Keep government accountable and ask people to be responsible as well. That's my take.
in America, with what's going on in politics, I know the judges can make the president accountable and stop.
A different topic because like we're like dealing with very
But that's already
very
check
very
and
difficult.
balances.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a difficult situation too right
Yeah.
now.
Of course, when you talk about the UN,
it's
very-
local. Yeah.
it's very different. At least you hear more voices. That's
Yes,
Yes.
and civil. Civil.
right.
They don't yell at each other.
Yeah, they don't yell at each other because that has always been the tradition of
Yeah.
multilateral diplomacy. That's why they call it diplomacy. So you have to be courteous. You have to be
Yeah,
diplomatic.
yes.
Courage.
UN is still really relevant. I mean, a lot of people, even in my in our organization, the UN is no longer accountable. UN is it's not relevant this day and age. But actually, I think UN is the only remaining intergovernmental body that opens a platform for governments to talk in the civil and it's still effective for me.
Not only governments, but civil society.
Yes,
That's the only platform I think that civil society can really be heard from,
Yeah.
yes, that's true. That's true.
right? And the other thing that I forgot to say, one takeaway I got is the need for more multilateralism. Okay, whatever that means.
Whatever that means.
I always I always heard that.
Multilateralism is working together, different stakeholders, right? Whether it's government or civil society, more cooperation,
Like everybody.
dialogue.
Just say like everybody's there.
Yeah, everyone's a stakeholder, so they should have a say on
Yeah.
whatever decisions are made.
Bilateral is between two governments,
Yeah.
right? It's a multilateral in this multipolar world.
Everybody.
Everybody is a stakeholder.
That's why decisions take a long time.
It takes 5 years, 10 years.
10 years, you're still talking about the same thing.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
Remember that age they mentioned, if you go fast, you're alone. If you go
Yes.
slow, you're together.
You're together.
So which do you want?
if you want to get things done quickly, you go by yourself. But if you want to get things done
To get
sustainably, then you go together.
okay.
So
And that's
Yeah.
exactly the way the UN operates. In
I
fact,
like that. I like that.
we had another saying at the time I was there. The UN only goes as fast as the slowest man.
It requires a lot of
How much should we close our conversation on that note?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I'd give the concluding remarks, concluding idea to Ambassador before we close.
Well, I'm now working, of course, with the Women's Federation for World Peace Inc. I'm glad to be back at least in the UN. I miss it in a way, but I know its limitations. But it is the only forum in the world, I would say, where everyone's ideas could be heard, and where I would say even innovative approaches to global problems can be really discussed in a very courteous way, a diplomatic way, so that we listen to each other, right? So that's, I think, what I mean when I say that we still need more multilateralism in this world, because without that, how can we come out with solutions to global challenges, global problems? There's so many, right? And what you call the common areas, that are meant more for humanity, but some countries decide to say it's theirs, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I think it's the only forum that we have where everyone can participate. So that's it.
Wow, thank you very
Thank you,
much, Ambassador.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, it's educational. This conversation is educational. It's different level when just us as civil society, UN representatives. We've been doing this roundtable talk for many months now, since last year. But it's to a different level when you hear coming from the diplomat, from ambassador, the seasoned diplomat. Yeah, this rich perspective, and you go a deep dive, and you notice in our conversation, it's very fascinating. I hope you enjoyed, everyone, and look forward to our next when roundtable talk. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.